Good evening, all, and welcome. I hope you're ready for our stories in the deep woods tonight. Get inside your tents, turn out those fires, and get comfortable in those sleeping bags. Because it's time to let the darkness take control. I have had guns held on me. I've been in car wrecks, got stuck out in the middle of the mountains with a dislocated knee in winter. And this is easily the most frightened I have ever been. Which is weird, because I didn't really have any real reason to be scared. It was in the deep woods, in Vermont, maybe at 11 at night. I'm in my hammock, just sorta chilling. I'm reading by my headlamp, when I hear a noise. I kill my lamp and listen. It sounds like something is moving about 100 yards away. I squeeze my eyes shut. I have pretty good night eyes, but I'd just been reading, so I couldn't see much. And I listened. I didn't hear anything else, but I was uneasy. I slid out of my hammock and snuck over. There's a large flat rock with two stumps on either side, like chairs. Laid out on the rock was dinner for one, plate, flatware, a big-ass sandwich, and a dark brown bottle. I was confused and a little creeped out, but not unduly scared. I reached for the bottle, not to drink it, just curious. And when I picked it up, it was ice cold. This was the middle of summer. There was no way it had been sitting out there for more than 20 minutes. As soon as I realized that, I got that horrible ripple down my spine, and the feeling of eyes on the back of my neck. I put the bottle down real slow, and put my hand on my pistol, as I always carry a .45 in the woods. I looked around and didn't see anything, but I still felt like somebody was eyeballing me. I walked back to camp, and my head was spinning like a top. I was ready to piss myself. I made it back to camp, but the feeling inside me persisted. If anything, it was worse. It reminded me of all the times I had to go down into my grandpa's basement as a kid and walk past his old stuffed deer head. That feeling of terror, and the knowledge that if I ran, it was going to get me. It was just like that. I was scared out of my mind, but by the time I got back to camp, I was sure that if I ran, something was going to pounce out of the trees. I left all my shit and walked maybe another 20 yards through the trees to one of the mini craggy cliffs you get out there, white-knucking my pistol as those shivers rippled from the back to my neck. Every horror movie I'd ever read, every scary story I ever told, it was all bouncing around my head. I put my back to the rock, and I stayed there. I had that feeling of being watched by something that had no love for me until about 3 in the morning. When the sun came up, I packed my shit and booked it. I didn't go back to the table. I just got my gear and hoofed out of there as quickly as I could. I had to sleep another night in the woods before I was out, and while I didn't feel anything, I still hardly slept a wink. Now, I'm fairly certain there was some kind of explanation for the food, and I'm sure the feeling I got was that I was just scaring myself. That said, while I love to camp in the Green Mountain State, I haven't been within 50 miles of that spot again. And I still have nightmares about it. In the early 80s, when I was 8, my family was visiting my uncle, who lived in backwoods Missouri. He lived on a lot of land, and the only other people who really even lived on the street were relatives, so no one else ever just happened to be out there. This meant no one ever locked their doors, because random family members were always coming by for this and that. One night, while we were there, my parents and aunt and uncle decided to go to a nearby town to go bowling, because bowling. And my brothers, who were 11 and 12, and my female cousins of 6 and 14, and myself, also a female, stayed home. It was still daylight when the adults left, but it started raining pretty hard and got dark fairly quickly. We used to play this game that was essentially hide and seek in the dark, but we cleverly called it Vampire. There was a thin little mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would sleep on at night. So the person who was on it would lie on the mattress and fold it over themselves like a coffin and count down to midnight. When they got to midnight, they went looking for you, with all the lights off in the house, and you had to try and make it back to the coffin before you were caught. Because the house was in the country, it was pitch black at night. You have to remember that we are very literally situated in the middle of the deep, deep woods, and you could not see your hand in front of your face. What this meant for the game is that 1, you couldn't tell where the vampire was looking, so you just had to make a break for it. And 2, if you were extremely lazy, and I'm sure by now you can guess which one of us met those standards, you could just hide in the living room with the coffin and get to base quickly. Ben, my 11-year-old brother, was it, and was doing the standard countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet from him. As he's counting, there's a flash of light. I don't know if I was already looking at the living room window, or if the lightning made me look. But with the backlight of the lightning, I see a man with his face against the window. He had his hands on each side of his face, as if he were trying to peer in, and looks exactly like the stereotypical creepster. Heavy set, scraggly beard. I could feel every hair on my body standing on end. Immediately, I began trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw. But then Ben sternly whispered, "If anyone is hiding in here, stay still." I sort of croaked out, "I'm here," right as there was another flash of lightning. The creepster was still there, but was no longer trying to look in the window. Instead, he was now looking towards the front door. Ben and I immediately knew what was coming next. From where he was standing, the creepster was probably only 5 feet from the front door. Ben was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door, and Ben leapt over the couch and locked the door right as the creepster was trying the handle. At this point, I guess Ben decided It was best to let the creeper know that people were home and that we knew he was there, because he flipped on the porch light and then started turning on the lights in the house. This is going to sound weird, but I was too terrified to panic. Having said that, I was relying completely on Ben to know and tell me what to do. He told me to go and lock the other doors, and was yelling for everyone to come out and lock all the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes are a haze in my mind. I remember everything up until this point extremely clearly. Then I remember the end very clearly, but I'm less clear about the middle. I know that I locked all the side doors and then the sliding glass door on the back of the house. When we've talked about it over the years, some people remember us seeing him out the back door as well. I don't think I remember that. What I clearly recall is locking the sliding glass door and standing there frozen, hearing Ben in a very calm but firm voice say, "Close the curtain. Listen to me, okay? Close the curtain." So I did. Ben can't even remember that part, and I just remember my fear in Ben's voice. We tried to call the police, but my aunt and uncle had a stupid party line, and it wouldn't work. Whether from the storm or from neighbours leaving it off the hook or whatever. For the record, they are the only people I've ever known with a party line, so this wasn't normal to me either. But for those of you who don't know what that is, in rural areas, multiple people on the same street would actually share a phone line. It would have different rings for different households, but you could pick up the phone and listen to your neighbour's conversation. We also tried to summon help on my uncle's CB radio, but it couldn't reach anyone. My uncle was a hunter, so he had a gun rack full of rifles in his room, but my older cousin was on an out-of-town hunting trip and took them with him. All we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. I vividly remember Ben trying to put me on phone duty and Scott, my older brother, on CB duty, while he stood watch at the little window at the front door with a BB gun. Maybe 30 minutes later, Ben said, "He's back! He's coming up the driveway," and the rest of us froze in fear. But Ben opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, pointed the gun and said, "Get out of here, right now." Then we hear our cousin Kyle, who lived down the road, say, "You know that's a BB gun, right?" Even though Kyle was only 15, I remember that we felt like we'd been saved when he showed up. Kyle seemed really skeptical of our story, like we were playing a trick on him, even though we had no idea that he was coming, but he stayed up with us until our parents arrived home. Honestly, I don't even remember if we even told our parents what happened when they got home. There was definitely no police involvement though. We just went on with our trip, but never played vampire again without some mention of that night. My brother is 7 years older than me, so when I was around 9 or 10, he was in high school and had to hide from our parents that he smoked and dipped tobacco. As a result, most days of the week after he got home from school, as I was homeschooled, we'd go out into the woods for an hour or two. We lived way out in the country, in an already rural part of East Texas, so there were plenty of woods to explore. The land south of our house was all owned by a mining company, and my parents didn't want us going out there. So we always crossed a fence to the north of our house and explored the woods out there. Very likely someone's local property that we had no business being on. But when you live out in the country, you figure you'll have plenty of sign before you accidentally walk into someone's backyard. After a few months of venturing out in this area, we never travelled more than an hour's distance from our house, and always in daylight. We decided one day we'd just keep walking and walking. My brother smoked and spat into a Dr. Pepper bottle. We entered big pastures and drove back into even deeper woods. Whenever we talked about it, we've always said that we must have travelled at least a mile, but we usually say far more. Eventually, we came across a circular pond. I distinctly remember having a much higher rim on one side, and my brother explained that was because a tractor had dug it out and piled up more dirt on one side than the other. We kept on going past the pond and entered another patch of wood, and we came out and saw that the tree line curved around sharply to the right, and the clearing we now stood in opened up far wider. We went in that direction, and while my memory of getting there is a little hazy, I know that we suddenly came across a very large white building surrounded by a high fence. There was a gate large enough for vehicles to move in and out, and a dirt road leading away from the facility. We could hear the sounds of activity and could see people walking around the outside of the fence near the gate. I'm afraid any other details I could give at this point might be coloured by false memory or exaggerations from an imaginative young brain. At that moment, we both felt the spine-tingling terror, alerting the body that something about this was very wrong, and that we were not supposed to be here. We were at least going to get in very serious trouble. We were standing in the middle of a clearing, gawking at a facility of some kind on what was obviously someone else's property. We were seeing something deep out in the woods that we had never known was here. All this time we'd spent walking around these woods, if we had just gone a little ways further, we would have stumbled across this. I remember standing there for a moment longer, asking my brother what this could possibly be. He told me something along the lines of, "I have no clue, but we really should get out of there." The tone of his voice truly freaked me out, as I remember running back hard the way we came, crossing the same pond and cutting a path as close as possible to the route we had travelled. When we finally stopped, out of breath, my brother told me that there was no way, shape or form that we could utter a word of this to our parents. They were spankers, and awful grounders, and he knew the trouble he'd be in for taking his little brother into what was quite possibly danger. After that day, we kept going out in those woods, but never that far. Eventually, my brother got caught with a can of Skowal, and my dad made him eat the whole can and puke it up on the porch. Being an easily intimidated little kid, it wasn't hard to get more information out of me than my brother's smoking and dipping habits. But I never brought up the facility we found. Over the years, my brother and I had brought it up many times. Our parents had gotten way laxer since we'd all grown up, and we even told them the story, to my mother's retroactive shock. We've added a lot of other weird ones to our arsenal in the time, as our family has always lived by huge areas of land for us to wander around. But this one would always be our favourite. It's always, remember the time we almost got killed by those government researchers? Remember the time we found that crazy building in the woods with people walking around it? But for the past few days, this event has been really bugging me. I had told my wife about it in detail, and she was pretty amused. I thought I'd look around in Google Maps a bit. Something I'm honestly surprised I'd never done before. And what I found, or haven't found, is really bizarre. Moving north from my old house, which has since burnt down and left an ugly scar on the satellite image, I can clearly make out the woods we spent our time in. When I go further north, I see several large clearings, followed by more wooded area. Eventually, I even found the circular pond, and I'm positive I can make out the higher end of the pond that we stood on as my brother explained how it had been made. When I drag the map further up, I see what looks to be the clearing and the sharp curve of the tree line to where we saw this facility. But there's nothing there. No trace of a building, no evidence of a dirt road leading away from an old structure. It's just pastures and more trees. In fact, when I zoom out and look at the whole area, it doesn't seem possible for there to have been an operation of that scale that we saw. Just a little ways further north, the land becomes nothing more but a pasture, with houses pressed up against a country road. For people to have come and gone from this area, they would have had to have made roads of some kind, as well as power lines stretching out to the building. But there's nothing like that on Google. In fact, there really is no, here it was, spot on the map. It's like it was never there to begin with. It's been a few years since I've talked about it, so I texted my brother earlier today, asking him if he still remembered what happened. He called me immediately after and said, "Hell yeah, that was a really weird day. You know how good I used to be in those woods, but that shit really freaked me out, and we had to get out of there." The whole event feels more like something that we walked into that we shouldn't have seen. I still remember the feeling of dread upon finding the place, and knowing that something bad would happen if we stuck around. I've decided I'm going to message my brother and see if maybe he's up for one last walk in the woods to see if we can get to the bottom of this once and for all. I work summers as a camp counselor in the northern parts of Ontario, Canada. On the summer this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-old boys on the same lake the summer camp was based on. So, like a routine camping trip, we canoe out to the site and set up our tents. Me and my co-counselor Mike take turns supervising the kids while they swim, build forts, and play games. We cook some food over the fire, sit around and tell stories, cook s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. Around 9:30, I tell the kids that it is time for bed, and they head into their tents, which were positioned a small walk away from the shoreline, but still in line of sight from where we had the fire pit. So the kids have gone to bed, and Mike and I shooting the shit by the water, just smoking a cigarette. We basically were hanging out before we decided to head into our tent and call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day, and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch black night water when we saw a small light approach us slowly and slightly above water level. We speculated what it could possibly be for a few minutes before it came close enough for us to see that it was mounted on the front of a kayak and that someone was approaching our campsite. Now, it is important to note that as a camp counselor, part of our training goes over how to deal with stranger encounters in an environment where we are responsible for a group of children on public property. I was prepared to give the mystery paddler the typical speech about how we are camping with a group from a recognized organization, and that we respectfully ask that they find another campsite. However, this person's appearance shook me to the bone. As the light drew nearer, paddling this kayak was a woman who looked to be in her 60s. She had incredibly long wisps of grey hair that were trailing in the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead-looking eyes were tough to spot under all her wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke, I realized she was missing most of her teeth. "Are your children safe in bed?" she asked me, pointing in the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond, and, quite frankly, shitting myself, I responded by telling her that we were fine and she had to leave. "That's good, just as expected for this time," she said with a smile, then turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At this point in time, Mike and myself were legitimately very creeped out, not only by the appearance of this mysterious woman, who resembled a freaking corpse, but also her inquiry on the whereabouts and safety of the kids we had brought on the trip. Not knowing what else to do, we grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire after checking on the kids. Half an hour later is where shit started to get really creepy. Across the lake, a female counselor was leading another trip for kids of the same age group. She sent me a text which read something along the lines of, "Hey Sean, stop screwing with us. This isn't funny. My kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know I had just seen someone near my campsite that seemed eerie, and that I was not trying to play a joke. Apparently, one of their kids had opened their tent door to take a piss, and had seen a woman with long hair standing with her arms open towards them near the shoreline. My boyfriend and I are a young couple in their mid-college years. We decided that we wanted to get away from working and our studies for the weekend. So we took a trip to the nearest hiking trail that is part of the Appalachian Trail. We decided to leave on a Friday once I got off work, and backpack up the trail in order to camp there over the weekend. You see, I work in a restaurant and it is very difficult to have a set time of when I am going to leave work. I ended up leaving work around 4, but we said that no matter what, we would be going on this trip. We finally left for the trail, and we began hiking at around 5:30. My boyfriend was an Eagle Scout, so we had all of the necessary supplies for a successful camping trip. A tent, sleeping bags, sleeping pads, pots, pans, stove, clothes, food, and of course, necessary substances to free our minds after the long hike. The first part of the hike was absolutely exhausting. It was all uphill, and we were both carrying at least 40 pounds in our metal-framed backpacks. An hour later, we finally passed the first shelter. If not, many of you know, a shelter on this trail is a 10-foot by 15-foot log cabin that only has 3 walls, as it is open to the outside. It is specifically used as a shelter to sleep in or hide from the rain. Midway through the hike, it began to pour dramatically in the forest, and sooner or later, we were both soaked from head to toe. The fog grew quickly, as it had been a hot and humid Friday. The trail became very slippery, and our pace slowed down tremendously. We had hoped that we were getting closer to the campsite, but it turned dark very, very quickly. We took a rest in the dark as it poured on us, in hopes that we would find our headlamps. Once we managed to find them, we placed them on our heads, still struggling to balance ourselves on top of the rocky and muddy path. I thought that by that point, we would never make it to the shelter. We walked, never giving up, although I wanted to, as my socks and shoes were wet. I was tired, hungry, drenched, and cold. The temperature had dropped more than 25 degrees Fahrenheit as we made our way up. It was around 8:30 when we finally made it through to the second shelter and campgrounds. There was a split in the path. Either you could walk straight to continue to the top of the view, which was about 1.5 miles, or you could turn slightly and walk to the right to the campgrounds. Or you could take a 90-degree turn to the right and walk to the shelter. At that point, we were drenched from head to toe and needed to dry off. It was still raining to beat the band, so it would have been nearly impossible to set up our tent in our camp. We had decided we would stay put in the shelter until the rain had calmed down. We didn't hear anyone at the shelter, so I was extremely excited to have the place to ourselves and take a few tokes, if you know what I mean. After our hike, I was dead set on it. Once we walked down the shelter and got to the opening, there was a man and a woman in their 60s. We instantly thought to ourselves that they were an older married couple who wanted to get away for the weekend too. We told them that we wouldn't be bothering them for long, so we wet our backpacks down and attempted to dry off. The couple were very welcoming, with a lantern and an absorbing towel for me to dry off. My boyfriend and I both took our shirts off since they were both carrying a lot of water weight. The couple seemed to be very normal, and the man brought a cute dog with him that I enjoyed playing with. We began introducing ourselves with our names, where we were from, and what we were doing. They both said that they were in their 60s. Their names were Joe and Maya, and they were just messing around for the weekend. In between sentences, they were taking large gulps of what looked to be alcohol in their water packs. They said they were just having fun and met online, which veered off into dropping hints that they were on the trail having an affair. The older woman, who says that she comes from West Virginia, struck me as very off. It began with her looks, having scraggly shoulder-length grey hair, with circular glasses resting on her face. Her teeth were very dark, nearly covered with a brown film, as if she had used hardcore drugs in the past. She wore a pullover, hiking boots, and jean shorts that nearly exposed everything. Joe, on the other hand, was just your average white male, who had grey hair and a tad overweight. They spoke about their past employments and what they had done in life. Maya said she was a writer, which I did admire. Information about ourselves was exchanged too, since they seemed very friendly. I was in a bad mood though, and very irritable until I smoked some. My boyfriend and I periodically showed each other our phones in order to communicate, as we didn't have a bit of service in the shelter. We agreed that it was okay if we started smoking, since they were becoming drunk. They said they didn't mind, but would like to join. I thought it was absolutely insane that they wanted to smoke too. The man only took 2 hits, but the woman took many. She was struggling a lot to even flick the lighter. The guys began their own conversation, and the woman and I veered off into our own as well. The woman began with asking me to tell her a story. As she inched closer and closer to me, she would ask me to tell her a story. She grew more and more demanding, saying, "Tell me a story." My boyfriend and I met online, just as they did. So I was going to tell her the story about how we met. I began the story with, "So you met him online, right?" The woman nearly cuts me off and angrily says, "What? Why would you say that?" I said to her, "You all met online, right?" She nearly cuts me off again, and more aggressively says, "What? Why would you say that?" I said again, "Earlier, Joe said that you all met online, didn't you?" And then she nearly shouts and growls, "Why would you say that?" I wanted to jump away from that conversation so quickly, so I asked her, "Well, you're a writer, you said, right? So why don't you tell me one of your best stories?" The woman becomes happy and giggly, and while swirling her hands around her head in the air, she says, "Well, I am a writer, in my mind." I was extremely confused and creeped out. I didn't know what to say. I'm the type of person to laugh it off, so that's what I did. She just said she enjoyed being a writer in her mind. I look over at my boyfriend and Joe's conversation, and it seemed to be as normal as could be. There was absolutely nothing wrong about it. But Maya nearly gave me the chills as she got my attention, getting closer into my face, asking me what I was saying. The problem was that I wasn't saying anything. I was absolutely silent, ignoring her. As she began talking to herself, she would make very in-depth hand gestures as she spoke to herself, then would ask me what I was saying to her. I wasn't saying a word, and she would wonder what I was telling her. She would abruptly say, "Yes, no, maybe, no way, yeah, it can wait, huh?" As she would rock back and forth, waving her arms around. She began crossing her legs, holding her arms up in the air above her head, and started to shout, "Coming out! I'm calling out, all of you come out!" She was nearly talking gibberish. The older man's attention was caught, and he asked her what in the world she was doing. She said, "I'm calling out, it's witchcraft." I was nearly high, and was terrified of all my surroundings. It stormed loudly in the background, and was pitch black all around us. A small lamp rested on a beam above our heads in the middle of the wooden shelter. It was wet and very vulnerable. Everything slowly began to get worse that night. Maya kept slurring her words, and the man demanded she get into her sleeping bag and sleep. I sat against the wall next to my boyfriend very closely as the man crawled into his sleeping bag, and Maya attempted to put her legs in the sleeping bag but couldn't. She moved about for a very long time, and finally curled up next to Joe, on top of her sleeping bag. She was probably freezing. It was about 35 degrees by 9:30, and only a few minutes passed, and we heard Maya whisper, "What did you give me?" She growled again, "What did you give me?" The man finally woke up and demanded, "What?" Maya hits him on the back and yells, "What did you give me?" She jumps up immediately facing us, her eyes nearly all black, and her pupils were so enlarged she looked nearly sadistic, and yells at us, "What did you give me?" My boyfriend and I both tensed up, nearly losing our shit, and she screams asking the same question, even louder again, as her voice stretched into my eardrums. She once again turned around to the man, laying down behind him, and she whispered slowly into his ear, "Did you give me acid?" It began to run through my mind that he had drugged her, or she was having a flashback of a bad trip. Joe attempted to calm her down, but she was still restless. She lay down for 5 minutes, but Maya immediately sat up. She faced us with her legs crossed, and she stared at us without breaking contact for at least 5 minutes. She did this every so often, sitting up, staring at us, and then lying back down. She would do this over and over again, so we decided to leave immediately. We finally made our way out, as she stared at us one last time. We pitched camp as far away as possible, but I remained sleepless that night, in fear that Maya would find our tent and crawl into it. My father and I are avid campers, not professionals, but my dad used to be a wilderness guide for kids. We typically prefer the eastern western Sierras, as they have great car camping spots next to lakes and a lot of great trails. Last summer, we decided to go up for a 2-night stay and do some day hiking. The campground was pretty full, not unusual for the summer, but we were lucky enough to find a pretty secluded site where we set up our tents. The first night was normal, Little bear activity, but we're used to that. The second night, I crawl into my backpacking tent and I pass out cold. Until about 3 a.m. when I wake up to the sounds of footsteps. My dad is a diabetic and needs to get up to pee around 3 to 4 times a night. And the sounds are definitely footprints, but they're coming from the wrong direction. We were located next to the bathrooms, so the footsteps should be moving in that direction, but they're coming closer to my tent. They stop about a yard short, and the breathing gets really heavy. I first brush it off as my dad, maybe lost without a flashlight. The breathing goes away, and I fall back asleep, only to be awoken a few minutes later to breathing right above my tent. You know that terror? The rush that goes up your spine. I had that. This wasn't my dad. I lay perfectly still, but the footprints continued to circle the tent. I had the rain fly on, so I couldn't see through the roof, and it was a new moon and pitch black. Now I convince myself that as a heavy sleeper, I am just dreaming. Just as that thought runs through my head, I feel a single finger run the length of my foot through the tent. Really slow and methodical. Now I figure I have to be dreaming, because my foot is in my sleeping bag and couldn't possibly feel that. But the comfort disappeared quickly when I realized, using the small ambient light available, that my foot was bare and out of the bag. I lay frozen as whatever it was stroked my foot for a minute or two, gave a few more labored breaths, and then just stood above my tent for what felt like an eternity before disappearing. I stayed up all night. In the morning, I heard my dad get out of his tent. I bolted up and met him by the fire. He looked me in the eye and asked if I had gotten up the night before. I asked him the same, and he said he had around 2 a.m. because he thought someone was going through our stuff. As I told him my story, we noticed our gear had been rearranged on the table. Every item, nothing taken. Footprints in a perfect circle around my tent. We still can't even talk about it without getting seriously skeeved out. Last summer, my boyfriend and I went camping in some nature preserve in Pennsylvania. I can't remember its name. It was pretty primitive camping. No cell service, and we saw 2 other people the entire time we were there. It was huge, so it was pretty empty. My boyfriend pretty much immediately said these 2 people seemed off to him right away. I don't know if they had anything to do with what happened that night, but I will describe them. The first person was a woman who had her truck parked off the trail and the hood open. I don't really notice these type of things, but my boyfriend said it looked to him like she was waiting for someone to pull off besides her and offer to help with her trunk. Normally, my boyfriend is the type to at least offer to call someone, but he said she skeeved him out enough, so he didn't want to draw her attention more than necessary. The next person we drove by several times whilst we were setting up. He just kept driving by slowly and looking at us. I didn't even notice though, until my boyfriend had already pointed out that he'd done it twice before. Whether these two people had anything sinister going or not, the real story had to do with what woke us at around 3 a.m. It was incredibly loud and sudden. I couldn't describe it or even compare it to anything, but my boyfriend said it sounded to him similar to a chain gun revving up, or someone using a large metal tool to scrape gravel. My boyfriend jumped up and looked out the little window of the tent. The sound happened again and again, and was getting noticeably closer each time. I was about to piss myself, but my boyfriend told me it was probably miles off. I didn't question this, because loud noises can be heard from miles off, right? Well, later, my boyfriend told me that's because he didn't want to scare me. It really sounded like it was coming from right down the little dirt road. At one point, he said he suspected it was right in front of our campsite. The only reason he didn't tell me to get out and dart for the car was because he was afraid it could be someone trying to scare us out the tent for some dreadful reason. He whispered. I should have noticed he was whispering and knew something was wrong, since otherwise he'd just speak normally, right? For me to go back to sleep. However, I couldn't, because every sound I heard made me think someone was sneaking up to the tent. Eventually, my boyfriend told me to get out and help him pack up. It was maybe 20 minutes after the sound stopped. He held our only weapon, a machete, in front of him. It was a full moon, or close to it, and we didn't need a light. While we were packing quickly, I noticed an empty beer can close to our dead campfire. It wasn't there when we were asleep around 10 p.m, and neither of us had bought any beer. Thankfully, we got out of there, and for the rest of the trip, we either camped in areas well populated by the campers, or got a hotel room. I was hiking and camping in the Okefenokee swamp. My girlfriend and I were far from being the only ones there. But when we woke up one morning, we took a canoe out in the swamp to explore. It was early, and there was a thick layer of fog resting just atop the water. The whole swamp was completely still. No animals in sight at all. We paddled down the waterway for a while and saw nothing else. Not a single person. Not a bird. Not anything. We did not hear a single sound. We had just cornered a bend in the swamp, and we hear it. The loudest guttural bellow I have ever heard in my life. I could feel it echo through my chest, a true dinosaur sound. We ceased our paddling to look up at each other, a little bit creeped out. We knew it was an alligator, but we had never heard one that loud. We both looked behind the canoe, and behind us, the backs and eyes of at least 20 alligators had risen. They had just surfaced out of nowhere. We slowly start paddling forwards, and we hear more bellows. They came from all around us, in front, behind, to the sides. Sounds emanating from the bush-covered banks. Each glance behind us, we saw more eyes appear, more scaled mounds breaking the water's surface. From the banks in front, We could catch tails sliding in the water. Ripples of the huge reptiles broke the water all around us. We looked back again as we paddled faster, easily 40 alligators behind us now, and we began to see them appear in front. 10 to 15 huge lizards seemingly blocking our path. Then, one of the largest alligators I had ever seen surfaces right where my paddle was going down. I hit the beast on the back of the head, and the thrash he made was incredible. When his massive head hit the side of the small canoe, I thought we were going to go into the water. Water came into the canoe as the side dipped down. The beast disappeared below the boat, and we held steady. We paddled forward as fast as we could, right into the dotted landscape of scales and eyes. Behind us, the same guttural roar echoed through my body. As we cut through the field of eyes and backs, we started to see a path clear. The huge monster that had almost capsized us bellowed one last time. We turned as we made it past the last of the animals, and we could see the monster staring at us, watching us leave. All the other alligators began to sink to the water's floor. The big guy stayed there watching until he was satisfied we had gone. Then he disappeared without a sound, back into the black murky depths of the swamp. We banked the canoe further up, got out, and just sat around for a while talking about what had just happened. So I was in Zimbabwe, on a hike with 2 adults and about 12 teenagers. We were not following a path and just using a map on a 3-day trip to these waterfalls, as the car was there to pick us up. We come to a dam with about a 20 to 30 area of beach sand. This is very unnatural and caused a lot of discussion. Where the beach stopped, there were granite boulders and large rocks. It was very attractive, and we decided to set up camp early. 1 hour later, someone finds this cave. The mouth was small, and we had to go down on all fours to get in. But once inside, wow, 3-meter high ceilings and 10 meters long. It was amazing. There was a crack in the ceiling allowing a beam of light to come streaming through. Naturally, the majority of us wanted to sleep in there. At 1 a.m, he is telling everyone to get out, as there is a leopard outside, and this is his lair. They often chose caves to reside in. I'm not too fazed, as this guy was always scheming up practical jokes. So I rolled over and pretended to sleep. Next thing I know, my sleeping bag is being pulled off me, and I am being ordered to get out now, or I am responsible for myself. I then realized he was not kidding, so I scurried out. We all then sat as close as we could to the fire, as we watched the eyes of the leopard, pacing up and down in the darkness, less than a stone's throw away, but has the water to our backs, so we were stuck. Fortunately, the leopard did not like the activity and moved off. However, they hunt at night, and we were pretty much sitting ducks, so I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound was a threat, and every moving bush was one step closer to the end of my life. Looking at the tracks next morning that circled the campsite, we were pretty freaking lucky. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, well, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life, if you stay there too long, without anything else going for you at least. Except a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees. The only employment in the area is at Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there is a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes there are really shifty people hanging around these trailheads, or just driving around on the forest roads. They are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along roads meant for 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that being said, it is still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. So a few years ago, two of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the national forest. I know, it probably isn't legal. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip, so that we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drove a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. But unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. The broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like the 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound. So it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up the tent. As we began setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the bottle, and I see it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time, and just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out there. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that is more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up our camp. We had some beers and made chili from scratch. It was delicious. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we're eating, we notice a faint glow from the other side of nearby hills. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself, though. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. My other friend Isaac decides to stay behind and pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought it could have been the work of beavers that lived in the creek, but it seemed strange that a beaver would just go around all these trees and knock off the bark in a circle. Jacob and I are talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices. This is probably due to our drunkenness, as we're almost at the top of the hill, and Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh shit." A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We looked at each other and decided that maybe we didn't need to see what the light was after all. We walked back in silence and kept looking back every few seconds. We decided to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around his hand. That seemed a little odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we'd been gone for almost an hour, and from the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back at camp, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to return. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of a tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes, he mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with a paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They're locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it? We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see that all our paintball equipment was just as we had left it. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I ask. I was watching a movie on my phone. Then I fell asleep, I guess. But you were walking around with a paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? Isaac said he had been in the tent since we left, and that he had been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent. We just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything in it. We jump into the F-150 and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something grey blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump. By this point, all of us had sobered up to the situation, and no one wants to get out of the cart and try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off. I assume it just must have been balanced there, and we drove over it, slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove, but fortunately, it did not. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It just stays 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. And after about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again though. A mate of mine and his cousin decided to go on a motorbike trip around their native country of Australia. Unfortunately, on the second day, the cousin's wallet falls out of his back pocket, and it was only hundreds of kilometers later that he noticed. A note to everyone: never put your wallet in your back pocket. Anyway, now the two of them were forced to rely on only my mate's money, since all of the bank branches refused to give my cousin any money without ID, which was of course in his wallet. Matters were complicated later when they filled up with non-sniffable Opel petrol, which buggered up their engines and required them to pay a mechanic to fix. The end result was that they had almost no money, and any money left had to be rationed for petrol. They were eating 2-minute noodles for every meal and sleeping rough. In some towns in the middle of nowhere, they would go to local pubs just for warmth and company, but could not afford to buy beer. One night, they stopped at a town that consisted of a handful of houses, a caravan park, and a hotel. When they went into the hotel, they met all the locals, including the local cop and owner of the caravan park. Mr. Caravan Park started talking with them and was getting pretty chummy because he knew that he was the only place offering accommodation, and camping in the area was illegal due to the presence of crocs, the reptile, not the equally scary footwear. Realizing that if they revealed that they were planning on illegally camping, Mr. Caravan Park could tip off the local cop. They sneaked off without anyone realizing and headed out of town. They were hoping to find some shelter, but it was featureless red dirt as far as the eye can see. After about 20 minutes, they came to a bridge and hid their bikes under it and set up camp. Even though they were in the middle of nowhere, road trains would come by regularly, which would be loud even from a distance, since the sound travelled so far and was deafeningly loud as they went over the bridge. The next morning, they all went back to the pub to get water and noticed some old photos on the wall. One of them featured a very, very large crocodile. In the background was the bridge that they had just slept under. I worked at a summer camp for the past few months, and I was alone with a group of 9 to 10-year-olds. The week started typically with a homesick camper. So the story goes that George can't sleep. I gave him the typical fun things at camp spiel. George calms down and lays back in bed. I lay there for a while longer until I'm confident he's asleep, because I'm not allowed to be asleep while campers are awake. When I started going to sleep, I hear humming. This frustrates me because I'm tired. It begins growing louder and more distant. It's really bloody creepy, and it even wakes the other kids up. I'm concerned, so I walk to him, and he just stares at me blankly in the eyes, smiling, and says, "Sweet dreams, everyone." He didn't have any recollection of it the next morning. No incidences until later in the week. It was around 11 o'clock, so all the kids are finally asleep. So I pass out until I'm woken by a crying kid. I ask what's wrong, and he says that George is scaring him and a few other boys. I see George sitting in the middle of the room, humming that tune with his head hung down. Kids around him are crying and trying to get his attention. I tell them to lay down. It'll be okay. I sit next to George and try talking him out of it, but he won't budge. I start tapping on him, trying to shake him, but he won't stop. He's just getting louder. All of a sudden, he jets up and looks around and just chuckles, walks to bed, and silently lays down. I convinced the other kids he was just sleepwalking or some shit. They calm down and fall asleep. But I can't sleep. I felt like he was staring at me all night. I went camping on a 5-mile hike off main routes here in the local woods. Just packs, food, drinks, and fire starting gear. There were 4 of us. It was around 11 p.m. when a friend of mine said he was going to walk alone back to the cars, take his, and go get more drinks. The only place open that we knew would sell them would have been 15 to 20 miles away. We all agreed don't bother because of how late it was, but he left anyway. I gave him my good mag light, and he went off. About 30 to 60 minutes after he left, the noises started. Sounds like a cross between an injured bear and a person imitating a Bigfoot. We figured it must have been said friend, and we all called him out. No response. No more noises. Another 15 minutes pass, and we figure he either really left or passed out in the woods. So the remaining 3 of us go to check on the cars to make sure he made it to them. All we had was one bad lantern and a phone light to guide us. And after about a mile or so, we heard the noises again. Called out. No response. But we heard the sounds of branches snapping and rustling towards our camp. We decided that one person will head to the cars and the other 2 will return to camp. I ended up being one of the 2 to head back. Friend 2 took the lantern and we walked back just using a bit of moonlight on the phone. We walked for a mile but didn't see our campfire, but we could smell the smoke. After about 10 minutes, we found the ashes. It didn't burn out. It was smothered with water, but not by us. Enough to say we were freaked out, not being able to see anyone else out there. We couldn't start a new fire, so we decided to cut and run, loaded our stuff, except for 1 or 2 items, and hiked for about a mile until we roughly hit the spot where we separated from friend 2 and heard the noises again. This time, much closer and right behind us. Time to dash, we thought, for about 2 miles anyhow. I couldn't handle more than that. I'm a bigger guy. Pure fear got to me 2 miles in. We only went back to walking when we hit a trail, not just cutting through forest. We felt safe. Well, ish. Knowing that the cars would be in sight any moment now. We got to where the cars were parked, and something seemed weird. 2 of the 3 cars were missing. Friend 2 had left in his car, and we had no idea why. We loaded up and hopped into my car and went to leave, but noticed the car was leaning. Got out and checked the tires, and noticed there was a knife dug into one of them. My knife. I pulled it out, Realizing it was mine, checked and noticed mine was gone. Shit. We started walking down the highway, still in the deep woods towards town. Friend 1 saw us, picked us up and we left. We came back next day for the car. Finally, we got everyone together and discussed the night. Friend 1 left and got drinks, flirted with the cashier and picked us up. And the second friend's story is the one that freaked us out. He said he heard the noises after we split, and he went back to the cars, turned, and in the distance saw a human outline standing there watching him, holding a small knife. They stared at one another for 30 seconds before the figure started to dash at him. He pops into his car and bolts. Don't know who to believe, except for what I've seen, but I haven't camped in those woods yet. Who knows how many times we got within feet of this supposed fifth person. I am an alpine rock climber, and I have one memory that is quite unique. My climbing partner and I are doing an easy one-day climb. We have to be at the trailhead at 2:30 a.m. and it's early alpine season. It's pretty chilly and quiet since we're the first car. I love that time of the morning. The stars are out and there is enough moonlight to see by, and it's cold. Different than winter cold. It's that windy mountain cold of early alpine season. Anyway, we carry on to get to this pass 3 miles in. It's not quite sunny when we go over the pass into the valley beyond. And when we make it back to the tree line, it's probably 5:30 to 6 a.m. and the sunrise is just hitting the peaks, and it's absolutely majestic. The valley stretches as far as the eye can see, filled with a pink fog lit by the sunrise. I'm soaking in what is one of the better sunrise sights I've seen, when I see this naked guy run through the trees about 100 feet below us, just trotting at a very determined pace. I think he's running for the trail, so we agreed to start going down after him. But the guy leaped over the trail and continued on into the woods. We started after him, called out and got no response. We continued on, and there weren't really campsites beyond where our destination was. The closest trailhead on the other side of the divide was 23 miles away. We were probably 6 miles in when we saw him, and were almost surely the earliest people on the trail. We didn't see any other lights, and none of the campsites we passed had sign of any recent activity. I am originally from a major city in southern Ohio, and outside of town there are a number of smaller townships. One of these is known as the more country bumpkin or redneck part of town. It's not even in the same county, but is part of the general area my city is thought of as. In the woods, there is this legend of Hell's Church, an old church that burnt down, where Satanists do rituals now, or a Satanist church that burned down by a ritual, depending on who you ask. There are a number of Hell's Churches myths in Ohio, in many different places, but this one was closest to us, and a number of my guy friends decided they wanted to be ghost hunters and check out haunted places around where we lived. We were all juniors in high school, and while all of us obviously thought this was just stupid bullshit, we thought it was funny to go out and scare ourselves. Plus, most people had cars or driving licenses by now, so we were enjoying this new burst of freedom. I'm a scaredy cat about most stuff like this, but I was the most tomboyish girl in the group, and always kind of wanted to be able to hang out with the guys. Plus, some of the girls in the group, who I was closer to, were going, so I didn't want to look like a loser nor a pussy. So one day in November, we decide we are going to go out one night and try to find this church. We had actually been to this location once before that fall, but one of my friends had a curfew. So after exploring an old barn and the railroad tracks on a nearby bridge, we left. We hadn't found the church, supposedly just a chimney at this point, to our disappointment and my mild relief. We took 2 cars out there, going past more populous parts of our city and back to this woodsy area. I can't honestly tell you how we got there, but I know it's off a state highway. Then, an abandoned access road past some old warehouse, and then down a dirt road. Once you get down the dirt road, there's a kind of thicker part of the road early on where we parked cars off the shoulder. We did this because the road thins out and becomes impossible to drive down. And also, someone clearly owns this land, and later down the road, there is some no trespassing signage. I'm sure tons of kids come back here, so it didn't seem odd to me that they wanted to block this place off. I barely thought twice about it. We get out of our cars and start walking to the dirt road, wandering off the path from time to time to check out barns or clearings where we thought the chimney might be. At first, it was just scary because it was dark and old or whatever. But then the barns started to get weirder. Like, they were filled with weird spray painting symbols and bullshit. But that's not what bothered us. We figured whoever was there before us did it, which I still 100% believe. But also other stuff, like dead owls that looked like they had been opened up, though they were dried out and decomposed by the time we got there, and other bits that looked like they may have come from animals. I was grossed out, but we all kind of agreed that these probably came from the teenagers that were trying to fake a satanic ritual, or the animals that got trapped in the falling apart barn and died there to be picked apart by other animals. My friends are now hardcore trying to find this stupid chimney, so they keep taking off through the trees into the clearing. Myself and the 2 other girls who were there kind of hanging back on the tree line for most part of it, getting a bit more nervous and a little irritated each time we came up empty. As we kept going, we find a bike on the tree line. It's a bike that perhaps a 12-year-old would ride. That's a little creepy, but fine. Whatever. It probably belonged to someone who owned the land, and we decided that we were just going to go up a bit further, and soon enough, we find another bike. This one is older, a little rusted, but still undersized. We didn't talk too much about the other bike, just kind of mumbling that it's probably still nothing. One or two of the four guys, who were the kind who were trying to trump it, said these kids probably got murdered, or stuff like that. But no one is really having it. By this point, we've already been here for 2 hours, and it's getting very late. Plus, I think we're all a little more creeped out than we want to admit. We decide to head back to the cars, and I'm feeling relieved. Happy to be heading back to my house and getting the hell out of there. But things never work out that way, do they? By the cars, we see a road that goes straight up a hill through the trees. At the start of it, there's a big metal gate that has a road closed sign on it, which we had seen before, but for some reason had never occurred to us to try and go up the road. We had a small debate at the gate, about an evenish split on who wanted to venture up and who didn't. I absolutely didn't, but eventually we decide we'll go up just to see. Both the drivers wanted to go, so there's not a lot we can do about it. We climb over the gate and start up the hill, where an old pavement road is cracked and crumbled under our feet. Though it was for sure a real asphalt road at some point. In addition to the road condition and the brush being an obstacle, someone had felled a bunch of trees over the path, purposefully blocking off the road from any cars. Some of us started seriously questioning if we should be doing this, arguing that someone obviously wanted to keep us out of there. But we were getting teased for being afraid and kept going. I couldn't see where the road would end, because it was so dark. We had a few flashlights, but it wouldn't do us much good, and the tree made it hard to see. Plus the road was super steep, so all you could really see was up, with a little moonlight peeking through the trees. All of a sudden though, we reach the end. The trees just open, and we have come off the incline to a flat field. And holy shit, what a sight it was. It's the flat field with a tall prairie grass on either side. Probably 2 to 3 feet high and pretty uniform. The path we are on splits the large clearing we are in down the center and leads through the grass to a cul-de-sac with 3 buildings. 2 look like they are farmhouses, with 1 barnish building. They were wood, and while they may have been painted at one point, they looked like they had mostly weathered and had been stripped by time. I see this and I am done. I want to leave. But of course, some of my friends say that we have to check out the buildings. At this point, I finally put my foot down, as do the other 2 girls, and one of the 4 guy friends who decided it was enough for him. He was our valedictorian, so maybe he was just smarter. So the 3 guys who wanted to go to the building tell us to just wait there. And while we don't want to be in this field out in the open, we decide we can't just leave them. At this point, we've turned off our flashlights because the moonlight is so strong. The 3 of them take down this little path, and the 4 of us who remained stand together, bitching about how stupid our friends are and making small talk. None of us say it, but we are looking at the grass every now and then, worried Something is going to jump out. It's just so creepy, this abandoned little settlement. It feels like our friends are gone forever. We see them get to a building and go inside. It was unlocked, I guess. We can see the flicker of their flashlights in the windows, and I just remember feeling so tense. It was like watching a horror movie in real life. After perhaps maybe 10 minutes, though it could have been just a tense 5, we see our guy friends coming towards us, lightly jogging, looking afraid for the first time of the night. "You idiots went inside?" I said, pissed off at them. One of my friends just looks at us, and I'll never forget it. It was full of bikes. Just bikes chained to the walls. We didn't believe them. We kept waiting for them to say that they were kidding. But they insisted. Said it was like they were just storing a bunch of bikes there. Most of them smaller. They looked afraid, and as much as I didn't want to believe them, I did. These aren't the type of guys that pull pranks on us for long. By then, we all agree that we need to leave, and we start down the hill, hurrying the best we can. All of a sudden, about halfway down the field, we can see a car's headlights down the hill, about where our cars are. We see them pass slowly, and we know someone is down there looking for us. Because it's so far off the beaten path, we figure it's one of two things. The cops. And we are going to be screwed for trespassing. 2. The people who own this land, or these houses or something, and they're going to either call the cops or murder us. We know the road isn't long, so they'll probably be turning around, circling back soon enough. And because our cars are there, they'll probably wait for us. We are all whispering about this as we pick up the pace, sprinting down the hill as fast as we can. I'm not a good runner, but I was hauling ass, getting down as fast as I could, basically hurdling over the fallen trees. Once we get down the hill, we don't see any headlights, but we know they can't be far off. One of our friends yells for us to jump in the cars, and we're fumbling with the doors like a horror flick, too nervous to get into them. We get in, and just as we start the cars up, we see the headlights speeding down the road. A giant black truck roaring up behind us. The truck seemed larger than life, raised up off the ground. The whole thing was terrifying, but extra terrifying was that we couldn't see who was driving in the dark, and with the headlights behind us. We peel out of there, totally pedal to the metal. The truck is still following, bearing down on us as our 2 cars race out of there. The car is also getting very close, threateningly close, almost as if it were trying to run us off the road. We're all screaming, looking back at the truck, fighting for some distance. Once we get to the highway, we're switching lanes trying to escape. Luckily, we were in sedans, so it was a lot easier for us to weave in and out of cars. But the truck is persistent and still chasing us. We are in 2 different lanes, but don't want to get too separated from our friends. Both passengers of both cars are texting back and forth, trying to make a plan. It took about 15 minutes to lose the truck. I'm not sure if the distance was too much, or if they turned around, but once we got to a big shopping centre, we docked off the road and into a Sonic parking lot. We all sat in our cars for a little bit, watching to make sure we weren't going to be snuck up on, before getting out of our cars and getting some food and talking. everyone, even the guys who had tried to act tough the whole time, were pretty shaken up. It took us a while to settle down, enough to head home. As much as we talked it over, we just couldn't figure out what happened. Eventually, we all did go home, during what was a pretty silent car ride. We didn't talk about it again for a long while, and we never called the police, which honestly, as an adult now, I feel like we should have. I don't think about it often, only during the fall really, but when I do think about it, I ask myself, who chased us? Why was that mini township abandoned? Who owned those bikes? And where are they now? I worked on a hotshot crew at the time for the Forest Service. So we spent 2 to 3 weeks at a time out in remote areas. We covered a large amount of ground on foot, generally no way near trails or common backcountry traffic. We found plenty of strange things, like stashes of guns, creepy old trapping cabins, and even had to shoot a bear once that was way too interested in our spike camp. We took bear matters extremely seriously. After a crew member was attacked by a bear in 2008 while performing a burnout operation. Bears are no joke. They are seriously dangerous. Well, one day, my buddy Greg and his saw partner were following the fire, cutting line. Suddenly, Greg noticed a pair of Carhartts, half buried in the ground. "Ooh, Carhartts," Greg said with enthusiasm, plopping chew spit out. Greg's saw partner knew something must be up, as he noticed from a distance that Greg pulled out his chew and flicked it on the ground. Greg always saved his chew for a 2-use cycle of consumption, and his partner gave him that chew an hour ago. As Greg picked up the incredibly heavy pants, they still had legs and parts of the vertebrae inside them. The upper half of the body totally missing. Turns out, some poor guy got torn apart by a bear. Literally torn apart. They found the rest of his body a quarter of a mile away. Must have happened a few years ago, because the remains were all bones. The Carhartts were completely intact. We thought it would make a great Carhartt commercial. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. So I wanted to give all of you a little bit of an update with what's been going on with my internet. For those of you who are wondering why I hadn't actually been putting pictures into the videos lately, this is why. Essentially, I've had some really big problems with my internet. It's been really slow, it's been very hard to upload, it cuts out sporadically, all of which is making working life very, very challenging. So today, we were supposed to receive a second engineer that was allegedly going to fix the issues we had. He was scheduled to come in between midday and 3, and he didn't show up, so I had to give him a call, and he said he'd be an hour, and at 5 o'clock he still didn't show up. And after leaving him a voicemail, he didn't ever get back to me, and about 6:30 I got a message from the company saying, "We're so sorry we couldn't reach you. We'll try and reach out to you ASAP," which is obviously really unhelpful, because now I have no idea what's going to happen. So, for the meantime anyway, we're gonna have to just get used to the blank picture, so I hope that doesn't upset anyone. I know a few in the comment section have mentioned it and I've tried to address your concerns, but that just is why. I'm hoping to get it fixed as soon as possible, and even though the company themselves are relatively useless when it comes to fixing things, I'm starting to think that it's perhaps the building that we live in that might have an issue. So, I don't know. That's just mere speculation. We'll have to wait and see. This is also the reason why today was a compilation. It's because I spent all day waiting and preparing, and I couldn't record thinking that he was going to turn up at any given moment. And then, of course, when I got the text message, it was a little bit too late really to start everything off, unfortunately. So I hope you all didn't mind. These are some fun stories as well, so they're always fun to listen to. But certainly going to have a new topic for you tomorrow, and I hope that everyone's good. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to drop a like, leave a comment, and press the little subscription button and bell icon to be notified every time I upload. If there's a story that you wish to share, feel free to send it to my email. I'll try and get back to it as quickly as I can, even though the internet is really bad. But yeah, go ahead and send it over. Just please try and paragraph it. Use plenty of punctuation, as that does help me read it and you guys listen when I read it out. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. And I'm sorry if you found the rant uninteresting. I just wanted to vent how frustrating it is trying to deal with this and getting no help from the provider. But anyway, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.